Hi, this is Barry Rosen with our blind spot course, Understanding Your Hidden Influence and Conscious Patterns. We're in lesson 4, which is part 1, dealing with blind spots in the houses, and we'll be starting with some chanting in just a minute. Okay. Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganeshaya Namaha, Om Ganapati Namaha, Om Ganapati Namaha, Om Ganapati Namaha. Vakratunda Mahakaya, Surya Koti Samabraha, Nirvigyam Kurame Deva, Sarvakareshi Sarvada, Dhyana Moolam Guru Murti, Puja Moolam Guru Padam, Mantra Moolam Guru Vakyam, Moksha Moolam Guru Kripa. Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karvavahai Tejasvina Vatitamastu Mahavidishavahai Om Shanti 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 Om Aditaye Samaye Mangale Buddhaye Cha Guru Shukra Shani Vischa Rahuve Ketave Namaha. Honoring great traditions of Lord Krishna, Goddess Saraswati, Goddess of Wisdom, Vyasa, and my personal holy tradition going back to Brahmananda Saraswati. Honoring my Gurghotas gurus who've influenced me the most, Sanjay Roth, Camilla Sutton, Bill Odyssey, and many others. Welcoming, I don't know if Jamie's here yet. I think she's coming. Catherine is here. John is always in Texas watching videos. Ellen is usually watching videos. Mohini's said she's coming. Claudia is here. Audra usually comes. Wu Sheng's in Taiwan sleeping. Offie's here. Victoria's here today. Christopher's watching tapes. Naomi's here from London. And I don't know what's going on with Fred and Laura. I haven't heard from them. And Pinar is in Turkey. Sometimes she doesn't have internet connection, so she may be watching tapes. She may come later, I think. Okay, welcome everybody. Good. Hope you had a good fall schedule, a good summer vacation here. Back from my travels. So this week we're going to start a 2-lesson, although this did not come out right. This week we're in class 4. We're going to be doing blind spots from houses. Next week I'm going to go back to a lesson that I was working on putting together a few weeks ago on blind spots from rising signs and from dosha's influences. And as I mentioned, in my tape sheet, sometimes I have to switch things around a little bit depending on how difficult the new material is to develop, how much what's going on with my life and what else. I will get all the lessons in, but sometimes I have to juggle things to fit them in a certain order. But I'm not sure there has to be an absolute sequence to the way we're unfolding things. So because I'm doing a sneak preview on July 28th for my money karma course, I probably it's going to be easier for me to continue with the houses and blind spots lesson that week. So that'll give you a couple more weeks to watch all the videotapes on the 7th, 8th, and 12th houses and to integrate them. So that we'll have some more time on that. And then we'll get to the Upagrahas in early August. I have added a new class this summer for those of you who like to be Jyotish junkies and double dip. You can always watch them on videotape. It's my personal finance and money karma course. I taught it last fall. I'm updating it a little bit, but it's again a lesson on Bitcoin. But anyway, there's a sneak preview for that on Saturday, July 28th on GoToWebinar, and there's probably a link that you bought for that if you want to watch that. It's the first lesson is free. For your friends, it's been a while since I've taught what I guess a beginning Jyotish course. I'll be doing that in October for 10 weeks. It requires no background in Vedic astrology. And, as you can imagine, my beginning courses are very deep because everything I do has to be kind of deep. So it'll be a very exciting course. My spiritual astrology course has moved to January, starting on January 13th. It's connected to a book that's coming out that probably won't be out by then, but we're working on it. The Nakshatra class, part 2 will be in May. Many of you have taken Nakshatra 1, Nakshatra 2 will be next May. If you're interested in the houses course, some of you have taken that, some of you haven't. It's about 19 lessons. It's one of my deepest classes for those of you who've taken it, and you saw some of the tapes from it. I've really been unhappy at the way houses have been taught, and very superficially, and so I've been put together a very, very deep course on this material. So if you like the tapes on Secret of the Houses and you want to see the whole course, it's available for my current students at a discount rate of $295, and I can send you a special invoice for that. It's 19 tapes, so it's a lot of material. Again, I'll be speaking in Sedona. Those of you who want to meet with me personally and get astrology into your body, I have my first spiritual retreat happening in October in Boone, North Carolina. It's really very reasonably priced. It includes room and board, and the course fee at $495. And it's going to be pretty exciting. I mean, we're going to integrate Hatha Yoga and Ayurveda into Vedic astrology. We're also going to do some Jaimini astrology, looking at the Park and Ishtadevata, and have a Vedic mythology sky watch. I hear the stars are really beautiful there. So pretty exciting. If you need a retreat, I'll be sending more information out on that soon. Okay, so before we start today, I always have trouble unmuting you here. I don't know why. So you can always unmute yourself. It seems to be the case, but it's interesting. So I'm going to start with the new material today. I always like creating new things, and I did some research on this and I was kind of intrigued by it. So I will go over the 7th, 8th, and 12th houses. That material is core to this course. In 2 weeks, we'll go over it in depth. Essentially, the PowerPoint main points on it already. I can take some questions on that in a little bit later. Could even do that now. But I wanted everybody to watch all 3 of those tapes, review the material, and then I'll give you some homework kind of trying to integrate and find the blind spots in your 7th, 8th, and 12th houses and how that's kind of manifesting. A lot of this course has to be kind of self-inquiry on some level. I mean, certainly it's even a little bit presumptuous and maybe inappropriate for me to kind of point out your blind spots. I'm hoping that you'll have a aha experience about your blind spots. I can help you with them. Sometimes we can't see our blind spots, particularly in the 12th house. So principles may help you, but it does take a lot of pondering to kind of really see what you're not seeing about yourself. Because sometimes blind spots hold our whole life. I mean, the more I'm seeing my blind spots in Vedic astrology, the more I'm realizing, well, they were there, and I kind of knew about them, but I was really kind of like blowing them off, Oh, I can get away with that, or something like that. So you really kind of have to do that. So I'm going to go to the new material on the 6th house. We will spend a little time maybe reviewing the second PowerPoint, depending on how far we get. But I have a lot of new material here that I've never presented before. I'm particularly thankful to Camille Sutton, who's one of her lectures, and a Vedic astrologer who's German Barbara Lama. I found a German article on this on Vedic astrology and addictions, and it was pretty incomprehensible. And I was able to glean a lot of key points for this talk from Barbara's research. So I'm very grateful to Barbara. I always stand on the shoulders of other great astrologers. So the sixth house is the house of karmic difficulties express themselves through enemies, death, struggles, and challenges, just serving others in our life. Addictions by nature are kind of exploitive. They produce short-term pleasure, followed by cycles of victimization, powerlessness, and shame. And any behavior can become exploitive and addictive if we get kind of obsessive about it. And I think we're sometimes, I decided addictions was really kind of important for this class because we're sometimes blind to our addictions because they're compulsive. We often do them unconsciously. We often are in denial that we have addictions. Certainly the classic alcoholic problem is that I don't have a problem. I only drink a little bit at night. And so, people are kind of blind to their addictions, and it's kind of something that's kind of important to kind of look at. I do want to, actually, I do need to go back to the previous tape. So the slideshow I sent you this morning has a few key points that I want to begin with. So and it kind of relates to the first part of the houses, the idea that the 12th house is very subconscious. It happens before sunrise. The 8th house is the mystical realm of the transcendent. It's a place of surprises, the karma that blinds. The 7th house is at sunset. So we're blinded to relationship. It also represents our back, what's behind us. So in general, when we're dealing with subconscious patterns, we're dealing with subconscious grunge. It's kind of ineffable. We can sometimes we just have this uneasy sense, this uneasy fear, this uneasy paranoia, this uneasy anger, or something. It just leaks. It's below the surface. We can't always put a hand on it, and you can see it in the astrology charts, and then you can work with it. But when we're going through it, we can't always experience it. I don't know if I've presented this to you before. I think it's important to understand, that the mind is kind of present in all, many parts of our chart. And I think we went through this before. I'm going to review it. First house is our alert mind, the intelligence which discerns right and wrong. The third house is our lower or negative mind that expresses aggression, sexual urges, and basic desires. And I think the third house is often overlooked because it is kind of this core kind of impulsive energy that we kind of act on sometimes. And again, it is kind of unconscious in that respect because it just kind of happens. Fourth house, again, is our heart, the set of our emotional happiness. The fifth house is our spiritual mind, connected to our ability to learn from our past mistakes, to move forward. The sixth house, which we're focusing on today a lot, is it is a little bit unconscious. The sixth house is not often thought about as unconscious, but it is because it's connected to the Shadrupas, which are in the slide presentation. These are kind of the vices that are talked about in the Vedas. And they're kind of unconscious at first. We may be aware we have these problems, but sometimes they often are very unconscious. So the sixth house has kind of an unconscious quality to it. And the eighth houses and the 12th houses are kind of connected to the transcendental area of the mind as part of that mystical realm. But there's also kind of a deep subconscious level to it also, which is why it has this ineffable kind of grunge aspect to it that we can't deal with it, and it leads to addictive patterns because when we can't deal with our emotions, it creates a problem. So the key to going through our blind spots is, first of all, awareness, which is what this course is about. If we see them very clearly and we acknowledge them, that there's a problem, that's the first step in moving out of our suffering. The next step is conscious action to change the pattern. Again, it's like Bill Murray and Groundhog Day. We have to do things differently. particularly if we know we have a problem and we don't do something about it, we don't change, then we're going to repeat the same mistakes and have suffering. We have to look at remedies for the karkas that are trapped. So when we have Mars in this 12th house, it's often repressed anger, and we kind of, we kind of don't acknowledge it because it's just kind of repressed. Sometimes I think 12th house energies are kind of repressed. We don't see them, and we kind of keep pushing them down. And so, like if you have Mars in the 12th house, you have to get exercise, or you have to speak out your anger, or find a way to express it so that it doesn't bottle up and explode. And then we'll talk about remedies for the blind spots later in the class, probably toward the last lesson. And certainly sometimes helping with the dispositor of the planet can be used as a remedy. And that's, again, we need a whole lesson on that, so we can't go into it now. Okay, so I wanted to go back. I just wanted to bring that in as kind of my overview for the lesson before I go into the 6th house stuff. What happened to my lesson? Okay. So getting into kind of these kind of this lesson on addictions is, kind of follows our work on Rahu Ketu last week, because Rahu Ketu have a lot to do with addictions. Ketu leads to kind of a feeling of abandonment sometimes, feeling alone, being isolated, and that kind of stirs up deep unconscious patterns. And Rahu, gets obsessive, and when Rahu and Venus get connected, you get obsessive energy around pleasure. To me, the most fascinating thing that I was digging up in this lesson is that, Venus is really, we think it's a first-class benefic, and it is, but it's really the basis for addiction, and I'm going to go deeper into that in a minute. Obviously we're all familiar with addictions. They can be anything from sexual gratification to oral pleasures from food and drink, numbing drugs, brain chemistry alterations. In a sense, some people are even addicted to meditation. I certainly have been involved in that as a way of kind of not dealing with our emotions. So when we're not able to deal with our emotions, then they lead to problems. Sometimes we act out, creating problems with gambling, extracting bribes. Cotton monsters have that problem. Illegal payments, shoplifting, just being addicted to arguing in our marriage, criticizing and belittling others can be an addiction. So there are all kinds of ways that addictive patterns can work themselves out. The whole, there's this huge problem with the opioid epidemic going on, and it's another reason I was just feeling like we need to spend more time on addictions, because it's so common to just about everybody, and it's hard to, on some level we have some addictive patterns. I mean, I know I do too. I mean, sometimes not gross addictive patterns like taking drugs or things like that, but even overeating to numb myself, or watching too much television to numb yourself out. Anything that allows us not to deal with our emotions. So I think the real problems with addictive patterns is that if you have a weak moon, I mean, generally, if you have a strong sun and a strong moon in your chart, you can kind of get through everything. But particularly when you have a weak moon and a weak emotional body, so moon in the 6th, 8th, or the 12th houses is particularly a problem. Moon X is affected by Saturn, Mars, Rahu, or Ketu. Is certainly a problem. And then the moon, has associations, through nakshatras and malefic nakshatras and exchanges of houses. So there are all kinds of ways the moon can be afflicted. I mean, you do find people that have just pristine moons in their chart and they're emotionally stable and they don't have addictive patterns. But you do find an awful lot of people that do. Obviously, afflictions to the 4th house and the 25th nakshatra by malefics are going to cause addictive patterns because the fourth house is the mind, the 25th nakshatra is the mind. So those kind of associations can be hidden addictive patterns. The Atmakarka, if your moon is the Atmakarka, it kind of is your soul, and if it's afflicted and poorly placed, then obviously your whole basis of existence might be dealing with weakness. So if we have a weak emotional basis to our existence, and our sun is not strong enough to deal with it, our ascendant lord is not strong enough to deal with it. Those are the three things that are most important in a chart. You want the moon strong, you want the sun strong, and you want the ascendant lord strong, and you want the Atmakarka strong, right? I mean, if you have all four of those things, you're kind of in great shape. It's unusual that we're here on this planet to grow. We have problems. Chances are one of the four is going to be afflicted, or when there are four of them afflicted, then you have more serious problems. You can be prone to addictive behavior. So, Venus is kind of the culprit behind addiction, and I've never really been fond of Venus, but again, it's a functional malefic for my chart, and I always have trouble. But when I was doing this lesson, I realized that there are very few charts actually where Venus doesn't really cause problems, because Venus is the is the guru of the Asura. So it kind of creates, its nature is to kind of get us involved in the sensual world, and it's very wonderful on some level, but it does kind of pull us out of our path to moksha sometimes. So in a sense, Venus is connected with sexual pleasure, numbing drugs, and delirium of alcohol, of course, addiction to beauty and things like that. But in some charts it's more of a problem than others, and we'll look at that. So Rahu and Ketu connected to Venus are particularly connected to addictive behavior. And in any bhava, Venus conjunct Rahu or Venus conjunct Ketu may provide some excessive or obsessive compulsive behavior. Both of them try to kind of dissolve boundaries, and Ketu wants to kind of transcend sensual behavior. Rahu wants to kind of embrace it all, and then there's always kind of this push-pull, which is why you get these obsessive compulsive behaviors. Whenever we get, whether we have Venus conjunct Ketu or Venus conjunct Rahu, you basically still get the same problems. My wife has Venus conjunct Ketu, and Venus is her ascendant lord, and she's had problems with being overweight and having addictive behaviors around food in her second house, and even though it's Venus conjunct Ketu, which has made her very spiritual, she's still always kind of struggling with the Rahu energy, even though it may not be conjunct Venus. They always come together. Venus and Rahu and Ketu always create a sense of no boundaries as they fling themselves in great trouble, very impulsive. And addictions are kind of impulsive. We're unconscious. We've eaten the whole cheesecake, and we're not even aware that we did it. I mean, it's pretty hard to do, but you've probably done that with something in front of the TV or something. It's kind of a unconscious addictive pattern. You're just kind of numbing yourself out on some level, not conscious of what you're doing. So whenever you see Venus conjunct Rahu in a chart, it's particularly a red flag. Rahu has this powerful sense of entitlement, coupled with ambitious sense for love, and no sense of boundaries. It just kind of, again, Rahu is always the unethical, beloved crook who kind of, is ready to take whatever it wants to take care of its cravings. And in even the original mythology, Rahu sold the soma to become immortal, so that so it was the first legendary crook of the gods. Addictive substances can be anything from being addicted to beautiful women, even you get exalted Venus. People are addicted to exquisite music, fine art, precious wines, owning all the diamonds in the world. I mean, sometimes you can get, but it's still kind of this outward sensual cravings. When it gets more afflicted, you get compulsive eating, compulsive sex, substance abuse, explosive anger. Venus is very seductive, if you remember. Sugar addiction is a really common thing. I mean, I have that one. I've got Venus connected to my 12th house through a part of art and yoga. When I'm, I would say most of my life I've been, when I'm emotionally insecure, I mean, I don't go for drugs or alcohol, but I go for sugar, which is another form of alcohol. It's a kind of a numbing substance to kind of take me out of my emotional pain. Venus can really kind of cause addiction in any bhava. And if you have Venus strong on the 1-7 axis or the 1-7 Navamsha axis, there can be a strong potential for compulsive sensual behavior, for party drugs, for alcohol, for young women. The ironic thing, which is, Venus, Shukra, which is the Sanskrit name for Venus, means semen. And Venus by nature is connected with loss of energy. Obviously, when we engage in sexual escapades, there's some loss of sexual energy, loss of energy that occurs. And by nature, though, Venus is often, meditation and Saturn increase our energy, and Venus by nature is kind of taking away our energy. The more sensual indulgence, if you go shopping at the mall, you come back exhausted, you overeat, you're exhausted, you stay up all night having wild sex, you're exhausted. By nature, Venus is dealing with loss of nature. That's not to be judgmental about Venus in that way, but it's something that's kind of inherently built in Venus, which is why she's kind of the king of the Asuras, or the queen of the Asuras, and the Shukracharya, she has a very positive role actually, also, but there's an inherent kind of a loss there. So this is some things that I've thought about. Certain signs, obviously, we'll do more of this next week. Certain signs do better with Venus than others. So certainly Mars-ruled signs, Aries and Scorpio, Venus rules the 7th and the 12th and the 2nd and the 7th. So Venus is a particular problem. Mars by nature is a celibate. He's a soldier. He keeps his energy to protect the planet, protect the king, protect the kingdom, and obviously if he gets lost in the brothel, he's kind of in trouble. In a sense, so Venus, Mars is particularly has trouble with Venus, and that's why Venus is a Marka, a death-inflicting planet, or a planet that causes sickness for Venus. Venus is a problem planet for Mars. Saturn ruled signs have the easiest time with Venus, because Venus is Yogacaraka planet and it owns good houses. So, if you know that rules, Saturn and Venus are good friends, and they go together really well. Saturn is so disciplined and strict, it can kind of control Venus, and it actually needs a little Venus to get out of its kind of strictness. I mean, I always tell Capricorn and Aquarians that they need to get massages, and they need to have they need music and art. Those are things that are really good for them generally, because Saturn ruled signs really need Venus, and Venus balances out Saturn. So though Venus has probably the least problem with Saturn ruled signs. Ironically, Taurus and Libra ruled signs have a built-in problems, because Venus owns the 1st and 8th for Taurus, and the 1st and 6th for first and 6th for Taurus, and 1st and 8th for Libra, and so there's kind of an inherent problem with itself. I mean, Tauruses and Libras kind of create their own problems with addictive behaviors, and such. And the rule is, of course, that the ascendant lord is always king, and that maybe the 8th and the 6th houses are not really bad for Taurus and Libra. But there's kind of this inbuilt problem and if we'll look at some of the examples for Libra rising and people, who have Venus in the sixth, there's just kind of an inherent problem just because, Venus is prone to needing sensual pleasure, and then eventually just kind of creates problems. Cancer rising has Venus on the 11th, which is 6 from the 6th, so it can have an innate tendency toward problems, particularly if the moon is afflicted. So again, the 11th house sometimes, if you check my houses course, is not, everybody says every planet does good in the 11th house. Well, that's true, but the 11th house is also a health house, like the 6th house, and so the 6th house is the big problem house that we're going to focus on in this lesson, because it's connected to vices, and so the 11th house has this tinge of vices because it's 6 from the 6th. So Cancer, even though Cancer has a problem with Venus in that respect. Leo rising has a problem with Venus because Libra is connected to the 3rd house. We said the 3rd house is primary urges in our life, which are kind of unconscious. Sometimes that's sexual urges. If you know Leos, they often are very kind of a strong sex drive just because Libra does own the 3rd. Gemini by nature, Gemini Matuna means copulation. It's the natural 3rd house of the zodiac, and it has an inherent problem with sexual addiction. We'll talk about this next week, because I always used to think Venus is the best planet for Gemini rising, but it owns the 12th, and Sanjay Roth gave a great lecture, and Geminis just have this innate problem with being addicted to love and wanting love, and then sometimes going up for it in the last place, being frustrated in romance because Libra Taurus owns the 12th. So when Venus owns the 5th and the 12th, there's always this kind of frustration in romance and always seeking for love but never quite finding it. And then I often find that Geminis, particularly Gemini men, sometimes get caught up in pornography and pornography addiction because they're searching for Venus for love and they can't quite get it. Virgos may have the best chance at balancing Venus because Venus owns the 2nd and the 9th. So Venus can be a spiritual influence for Virgos, but there's still kind of a 2nd house influence with substance because Libra owns the 2nd. So there can be, but I do find that Virgos are probably more disciplined so of all the zodiacal signs, probably Virgo, Capricorn, and Aquarius do the best with Venus and with addiction if other factors in the chart are not operating. The problem with addiction is it's unsatiable, and it's never quite satisfied, particularly if there's a Rahu section. So it becomes kind of a problem. So before we go into the second section, does anybody have any question? Anybody want to say anything? I don't mean to be bashing Venus in this lesson, but I was just kind of had this huge eye. I mean, Venus can be good, obviously, many places in the chart for many people, but I was actually surprised what a problem Venus can be in many more charts than I thought. Anybody want to say anything? Any quick questions? Now, you also have to understand that I have a little bit of a Vedic perspective. In a sense, we're here to get off the wheel of suffering, and the more we get caught up in the binding pleasures of Venus and get addicted to the sensory world, the less likely that we're going to get off the wheel of karma, because we keep creating new karma by getting involved in another relationship is going to solve my problem, another glass of wine will fix my emotional problem, another candy bar will soothe my emotional problem. In a sense, it doesn't ever quite end, and so we ultimately have to get off the wheel of karma. Now, we're not going to be able to cover, well, we can't cover most of these things, but so Venus is really a problem for charts when it's connected to the 6th house, to the 12th house, planets that are even 6 houses from Venus. Again, that's kind of a karaka. So I don't have too many examples of that. Venus in the 6th house from the moon, we'll see a couple of charts with that. Sometimes the moon chart can be very critical. Venus connected to Rahu and Ketu very strongly. within 5 degrees. The general rule with Rahu and Ketu is it's a real problem when there's a 5 degree or less aspect. I mean, if it's a wide aspect, there's an influence, it's not as strong. But when it's within 5 degrees as a conjunction or a trine, it's much more powerful. We also have to remember, those of you who study me, Venus has a second house aspect from Rahu. So if you have Rahu in the first house, then Rahu's aspecting the second house, the house of food, the house of substance, the house of nourishment. So Rahu in the first automatically creates a kind of a problem. So remember that Rahu does aspect the second house from itself. If Venus and Saturn are in a 6-8 relationship, it creates a problem. Again, anytime you have, if you took my relationship course, anytime you have 6-8 connections between planets, there's incongruity. If you have relationship problems, if you have a Pisces moon and your partner has Leo moon, you have a 6-8 relationship. So there's no compatibility. It's much more conflict. So if you have a Venus-Saturn connection in a 6-8 relationship, that can create addictive problems. Debilitated Venus by nature is a problem because it's just in sensual overload. It kind of loses its balance. And even we'll see an exalted Venus. Liz Taylor has an exalted Venus. She got Venus in the 6th. Is kind of a problem because you can get addictive to. You meet. I do know people. A lot of people with exalted Venuses, and sometimes they're addicted to the finer things of life, like a fine arts collection, or spending all their money on beautiful things, or being addicted to having this huge wine collection and buying $1,200 of wine. And that's the type of things that an exalted Venus can do if it's in the wrong houses. And then you can have Venus and Saturn exchanging houses, the Parivartana Yoga. I have that in my chart. That's more where my addiction comes. I have Saturn in Libra and Venus in Capricorn, so they're exchanging houses. It's between the 3rd and the 12th, so it's a strong hidden problem there. I'm mentioning it because it's something. And Venus and Saturn oppositions are going to be kind of a problem. So all these things can kind of create addictions. We have to go into them more carefully. So it's kind of funny. Even exalted Venus can cause problems. I was saying you can be addicted to. You may have financial treasures, great external beauty, and artistic talent from the exalted Venus. But on some level, it's still. If you look at all these famous people with exalted Venus, I think Johnny Cash has an exalted Venus conjunct Rahu, and he had like alcohol and drug problems most of his life, even though he's this incredible talent, one of the most famous country stars ever. Elizabeth Taylor has Venus Rahu in the 6th exalted. She also exhibited a lot of addictive behaviors toward attractive substances, delicate and exquisite characteristics, beautiful lovers, fine wine. So, I mean, even the exalted Venus, if it's connected to the 6th house, can cause problems. I'm going to pass on that for now. I just mentioned Liz Taylor and Johnny Cash. We'll look at Liz Taylor's chart in a minute.
Hey Barry, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So with these Venus relationships, can that energy follow through on the karmic wheel? Is that?
I'm not sure I understand your question, Jamie.
Okay, I'm trying to think of a way to frame it. I guess I'm thinking about the karmic wheel, past lives, because it sounds like really intense, especially if there's like, Venus Rahu relationship. Let's say you're looking at, maybe a couple, if you're doing, chart analysis.
Right.
And you're looking at it, from today's perspective, but you might see something, maybe in the charts that you're looking at. I was just wondering if there might be some sort of indication If it's that strong and that addictive now with that energy, I'm wondering if it carries through the wheel. Does that make sense?
I'm not totally understanding the question. You might have
Okay, no.
a friend's chart that you want to share with me, privately, and I can talk to you about it. Is that? I'm not sure
Okay.
what you're. I'm not sure I'm
Yeah,
understanding.
let me think. Let me let me let that sit for a bit because yeah. Okay, sorry.
Okay, here's Liz Taylor, and 1932. I think Liz Taylor had 7 marriages, which is a classic person to study for in our relationship class. But um, um, now I am wrong here. She's actually got Rahu and Venus in the 3rd. I thought it was the 6th. I'm wondering if I've got the right data now. Well, in any case, she still has the kind of the Rahu Venus connection. And the 3rd house is kind of, it's still kind of one of those primal unconscious charts. I mean, she built this whole career around beauty and being addicted to beauty. With Exalted, she was the beauty symbol. I mean, look how strong that Venus is at 24, 27. Um, but in a sense, you could see how um, um, she did have alcohol problems. She was very kind of um, she was kind of addicted to love. Again, Venus is the Karaka for love. In a sense, there was this kind of incredible urge for more love in her life that kind of kept, was never quite got fulfilled. And I think she's safe because she's got she does have Saturn aspecting Venus, which we said is one of the things that kind of can bring out a Venus addiction. But we do, Saturn, Capricorn, and Aquarians, and she is Capricorn actually. Capricorns, will do best with Venus, and so I think her life, worked, and she was able to kind of take her beautiful charms and really kind of make become an incredibly sensual person. Everybody wanted her cosmetic lines and stuff like that. But very interesting chart. If some people have Mercury with an exalted Venus. I believe that's in the case of Albert Einstein. I think I have his chart also. He's Gemini. Does he have the exalted? Yeah, Albert Einstein. He's a Gemini, and he's got an exalted Venus, a very complex 10th house. He's got the exalted Venus here. Um, if you went through Einstein's biography, I mean, he actually had a very kind of unhappy love life. I mean, kind of illustrating this idea of the problem with the 5th and the 12th. He in his Discover Channel or the History Channel did a 10-part biography by Frank, not Frank, Opie from Frank Howard. Ron Howard directed a very brilliant biography of Einstein. You should all watch it. It's quite amazing. But you see, he did have this kind of subtle addiction. People always talk about Einstein because his debilitated Mercury was canceled by the exalted Venus. But he was actually kind of a very troubled soul when you really kind of study him. And he had a tobacco addiction, which I think was probably pretty common in that type of age in Europe. But he had a lot of happiness from love also. And again, the Saturn Venus connection is shown there. The debilitated Mercury, when Mercury's in Pisces, it makes people too kind of dreamy. Mercury needs to be logical and practical. The Saturn there in Einstein's chart helps him a little bit, but it does kind of, it can lead to some problems. And Einstein, when these people become very famous on some level, but then when you study their lives carefully, you find out, there's often, geniuses often have a lot of turmoil underneath, and you can kind of see it there in that chart in that 10th house. So Venus is the notorious Shukracharya. So she's capable of diverting one's artistic genius from creative entropy into deadening sugar entropy. So and that that can be alcohol problems. The interesting thing about Venus is Venus governs the second chakra, and that's our center of creativity and procreativity. And when the energy is going up, artists are often very kind of highly sexually crazed individuals because they have a lot of artistic development and they have a lot of energy in the second chakra. When it goes up, it creates artistic expression, and when it's blocked, it leads to entropy, and that leads to sexual addictions. I mean, we study the lives of all these great artists. I mean, you find that they were, they always are portrayed as being highly sexed, highly addictive creatures, and it's because of this kind of problem with Venus. The energy when it goes up creates artistic genius, which we admire so much, and when it goes down, it creates numbing sex or addiction to alcohol and sweets to kind of get through the energy. So again, it becomes this balancing act. Again, we could probably do a whole lesson on artists, and they're so fascinating. So when we put an exalted Venus with the moon, it can create obesity and alcoholism. The native pursues excessive emotional driven self-nourishment, addictive eating in search of sensual satiation. So even though Venus could be strong in Pisces, it can create problems. It's just by nature. Venus Moon is actually a wonderful Gemini combination for wealth in someone's chart, and but it doesn't come without its problems, and sometimes that can be these addictive behaviors. They may have incredible artistic talent, but they may be suffering from a problem with their mother. So basically, when we look at anytime Venus is in the 6th house in any zodiacal sign, it produces some type of substance abuse. Al Gore has Venus in the 6th house in Scorpio. Has a problem with overeating. George Harris had Venus in the 6th in Pisces. He was a smoker. Johnny Cash, exalted. I need to bring up that chart. I forgot to get it. It's got exalted Venus conjunct Rahu in the 6th. And he had a lifelong struggle with depression, addiction, and alcohol, despite being incredibly successful, and all kinds of women problems too. So he's a classic example of you can have the artistic genius, but with it comes the price of depression and addiction. Michael Jackson was addicted to all kinds of drugs, and eventually died of because he couldn't fall asleep and he had to be anesthetized. Hermann Hesse, another one of my favorite German authors, was, I don't know if you know Hermann Hesse, is a big cult following in the 60s. I used to teach him in my literature classes all the time. He also had a lifelong addiction problem. He also had a connection to Venus in the 6th. I have some of those charts. We could look at them a little bit later. So anytime we have Venus connected to the 6th house from the Lagna or the moon sign, the sign that it's in will determine kind of the type of addiction. So we can go through all the signs of the zodiac. So Aries, so this would be Scorpio rising. So Scorpios by nature are sexual, but you put Venus in the 6th. Now Venus doesn't like being in the 6th anyway. You put it in Aries, it gets to be a problem. And Would you hold on a second? I have to. I'm recording this, and I don't want. I don't know if you can hear my wife's phone in the background, but I don't want it to show up on the background. I'll be right back. So, something about Venus in the sixth in Aries. So again, this can lead to a lot of carnal passion, headlong problems. Sometimes the classic Vedic texts say you will not always be well spoken of. There's kind of problems with the relationship for Scorpios. We put Venus in the sixth. There's kind of a relationship addiction there. For Taurus, Venus for Taurus in the sixth is going to be Sag rising. This is a kind of a fascinating example. We've got William Randolph first. I'll show you that chart in a minute. Second house, Taurus is always connected to family, to history, to banking, to food. And there's actually kind of a problem where you can actually, Venus in the sixth is just a really kind of, in Vedic astrology we call it Marna Karkastana. It's one of these really kind of bad placements for Venus. And so for Sag rising, it creates a problem of degeneration, poverty, overspending on sensual addictions, addiction to wine, women, and song, all kinds of unsavory environments, all kinds of fighting, and delighting in massage, sexual entertainment, seductive music, and sense, so connected to alcohol addiction. Now, William Randolph Hearst, you've seen the movie Citizen Kane, was based roughly on the life of William Randolph Hearst. He was just kind of he's kind of like an empire magnate. I don't know how many people know about him. Here's his chart. He's born in 1863. He developed this kind of newspaper empire. He was kind of like, we have Amazon taking over the world with Jeff Bezos now. William Randolph Hearst was kind of like that too. He kind of developed this amazing amount of wealth in his life and power by controlling the press, and he had all this power over politicians. But he had this very kind of troubled life of debauchery, and if you watch the end of Citizen Kane, he kind of dies, remembering his 6-year-old boy who had a sled named Rosebud. It was kind of, he developed this incredible wealth, but he became this horrible alcoholic and womanizer, and it was really kind of a loving person. Here you have Venus conjunct Ketu. So remember, we said Ketu or Rahu conjunct Venus in the sixth is going to create major kind of problems, and this is kind of a case where that's happening. Whenever you get Ketu, you get Rahu in the 12th. But here's a man who had just one of the wealthiest people of his time, but it kind of used that. In Venus, he would say, "Oh, Venus is in its own sign in Taurus." Well, it's in the sixth house. In this case, it really kind of led to this very kind of difficult, unhappy life. I don't know. It's very kind of fascinating. Okay. Venus and Gemini in the sixth house, so that's Capricorn rising. They have anytime you get, Gemini is the natural house of Gemini means Matuna is a Sanskrit name, and it translates roughly into copulation. So Geminis have a very kind of strong sensual addiction. This may take the form of a sensual addiction to touching, talking, and encountering in the workplace. Um, Again, it's Venus in the sixth in Gemini is going to kind of bring. Don't forget, the sixth house is also connected to the workplace and everyday work, so you can get caught up in sexual exploits in the workplace with that kind of combination. People get into kind of sex texting, and I guess there's a word for that. With that kind of combination, they love sensual communication, and that's the type of thing that can happen there. But it eventually, Gemini can often get caught up in lies and get in scandals, and that leads to divorce litigation and things like that. I don't have an example of that one. Venus in the sixth in Cancer, which is Aquarius rising. The moon is this Achilles heel for Aquarius rising. They always have mother problems. So Cancer, the ruler of the moon, is kind of always an Achilles heel sign for Aquarius rising. And so Venus in the sixth is particularly a problem. It can create addictions to mothering, taking on homely criminals, ailing servants, and chronically bickering. And again, Cancer always has to kind of nurture people. You may have problems with sickly and women with who need nursing care and things like that. So, very kind of fascinating. In spite of all this, you're accused of miserliness and a shortage of money, even though you're very generous. And this leads to fits of depression and problems with female relatives. So that's what happens with Venus in the sixth in Cancer. Venus in the sixth in Leo, which is Pisces rising again. Pisces has trouble with Leo and the Sun. It's one of those kind of Achilles heel planets. There's some protection here, but there's still a lot of secrecy and hidden pleasure connected to that combination. Illicit identity crisis. There's an addiction to theatrical glamour. Again, anytime you get movie stars, always have that Venus Leo combination. So there's all this sense of exploitation and drugs that get involved in that. And all this stuff seems glamorous when we watch it on TV, but it gets rather empty, and it leads to a lot of problems in the end. Hollywood kind of builds up all this kind of glamorous energy around Venus, but in the end, there's always kind of some there's never enough. The sex doesn't enough. More food, more sex, more pleasure, more beautiful things, and still not happy. So it has that kind of energy. Zucchera is the German word for Venus. And Simha is a sign for Leo. There's often this kind of quest with Venus in the sixth house, is this kind of addiction to being to publicity. Anytime you get Venus and Leo, there's this desire to be in the papers and to be famous in kind of the glamorous entertainment industry. But it eventually leads to the famous story Sunset, the Sunset Strip, the famous musical, famous movie from 1950 about this kind of failing actress who goes into her later years and still desires all this fame and glamour, but nobody sees her. Sunset Boulevard, very famous movie. This is kind of I do have a chart here we should look at. Luciano Pavarotti, he had this. This is an example of Venus and Leo, connected to the 6th and the 12th. He had this reputation for being this ladies' man, very famous opera singer. Just had all this incredible success on an opera, but was always involved in pregnancies and divorces and remarriages. It's a kind of a real problem. And the ironic thing is that he got so much publicity. Again, people, Venus and Leo, wanting publicity, wanting attention, wanting fame. increase his fame because he's always in the papers with another scandal and another miscarriage or another pregnancy, and quite a chart here. Oh, it didn't come up. Why did it come up? Okay, here's Paparazzi, Pisces rising. He's got Venus and Leo in the 6th. And there's no, in this case, the affliction, we said he's got a Venus-Saturn opposition. We said one of the problems for kind of addictive behavior. And this isn't exact, this man's addicted to fame on some level, right? He's addicted to public attention. He creates so much scandal with women that he's always ending up in the newspapers, increasing his notoriety and getting more people to come to the opera to watch him. But you see, we said Venus-Saturn oppositions was an addiction, and here's Venus in the 6th in Leo. Quite a man. But an amazing voice, I guess. Moon in the 2nd, I guess, is good for singers. I remember, but it's kind of a very interesting chart here. And Venus is in Purva Falguni Nakshatra, again, its own nakshatra. So there's a lot of power in this Venus, for beautiful things. But again, if you remember from the nakshatra course, that nakshatra can be that nakshatra specifically is tied to producing children. It's actually the fertility nakshatra, and so he is very good at producing lots of children in illicit affairs. Quite a chart here. Rahu in the 10th, interesting. Debilitated here. Saturn in the 12th. So anytime you get, we learned from, anytime you get Saturn in the 12th, you get kind of addicted to overspending, and I'm sure he had that problem. I had to complete my research on that. Kind of fascinating. Venus in the 6th in Virgo. This is the most difficult one because Venus is debilitated in the sign of Virgo. And again, there's an addiction to argumentation and critical analysis. Again, Venus is debilitated in Virgo because Virgo is about critical analysis. And when you're in love, you can't pick your partner to death. And so anytime you get Venus in Virgo in a woman's chart or in a man's chart, they have a partner that they're just picking to death, and they're never happy because there's always something wrong with their partner. So kind of it's a problem. But there's a lack of, the Vedic texts say there's a lack of comfortable living with Venus in the 6th in Virgo. Often divorce, loss of money, venereal disease, heavy debt. I've seen a lot of charts with Venus in Virgo. I've seen it. I have a friend who's got Venus in the 12th in Virgo, and it's kind of a mess. Just really difficult in relationships. No basic skills in relationships. He gets into fights with everybody. And that's kind of a problem here. Venus in the 6th in Libra. Now this is really kind of a funny one. This is for Taurus rising, and you would think, oh, there's some wonderful yoga here, but there's a problem with it because this is one of those kind of hidden problems that I was saying about Venus in Libra, because for Taurus rising, because Venus just kind of it can be a little bit too off balance. Love is sweet. Gets caught up in sentimentality, sweet deals, being nice, superficial solutions to deep problems, failing to see the evil side of human nature. I mean, one of the problems with Venus, talk about that next week, is if you get afflicted benefics like Jupiter and Venus, people aren't able to discriminate and see the dark side of people. They get naive and think everybody's wonderful, and then they get into trouble when inevitably people have a dark side and it comes out and they're blinded by it. It's an example of how Venus is a blind spot for some of these rising signs. They have to be discriminative and see Saturn as be realistic and test people very carefully, because otherwise they get into trouble. So Venus in the 6th here can create, for Taurus, it can create relationship addiction, persistently foolhardy and trusting the wrong people and trusting affections to the wrong people. And again, it just leads to problems. I think I have typically, you'll find prostitutes who fall in love with their clients in this kind of a chart, and then they get in trouble, or nurses who fall in love with junkies. And it's kind of this addicted to love situation with Venus in the 6th, lack of discrimination, and then eventually it leads to problems, sometimes venereal problems. It's very common with Venus in the 6th. And 6th house is a health house, and so that's the type of problem you get, even though Venus is in its own sign. Remember, I taught you that there's usually some affliction. It's in the wrong nakshatra. It's getting some aspect from something. It's rare that you get just kind of perfect. Once in a while, you get a perfect yoga with no affliction, and then the person, has a lot of fame and is extremely good at what they do. But most often, even you have to look, there's always some affliction or dosha there. Here's an example of Michael Douglas. Who had a very kind of troubled life. Again, people can have fame. We always look up to these actors, but they have very kind of difficult lives. He's got Venus in the 6th in Libra, and he's Taurus rising. Okay. It's in Chitra Nakshatra. It's in which is Mars's nakshatra. This is bringing in Mars in the 5th here, but and it's also his and Michael had during his Venus Mahadasha, age 24 to 44, he had sex, drug, and alcohol addictions very strongly. So here's a case where, kind of a perfect example where you might think, oh, we're the 6th and the 6th, he's going to be able to overcome all this stuff. But he had a pretty difficult Venus period, and most of his life, even in his 70s, he still had problems self-medicating himself with smoking and alcohol. He developed tongue cancer. He had to go through chemotherapy, and he had all kinds of SDTs. Very kind of interesting life. Again, great actor. Kind of interesting. You have to look at his D10 to see where the acting's coming out. Virgo rising, the D10. Good, debilitated Mercury. So very interesting. Let's go why he became such a great actor. Any comments from anybody about Michael Douglas? Been an interesting life. But you can just see that he just had a very kind of this is an example where you get okay, Ascendant Lord in the 6th, but it's seeing lifelong problems with addiction connected to his own self. Again, that's an example where he's his own worst enemy. Any comments about Michael Douglas? We'll look at it. I never liked him. Actually, never attracted to any of his movies. Last thing I think I saw him in was The Game, which was actually quite a powerful movie, but never was a compelling character for me. And I don't actually, probably his Aruda Lagna is probably very strong. His Aruda Lagna is Pisces. So people see his Jupiter quality in him. Jupiter's very strong in Leo, so actually that's kind of where his fame is coming in. It's kind of interesting. Pouring rain here now. Okay. So Venus in the 6th in Scorpio, so that would be Gemini rising. Again, anytime you get addictive problems in Scorpio, you really get problems. You get addiction to alcohol being very prominent, deep, intense psychological problems. Anytime you have anything with Scorpio, when you get Scorpio afflicted, you get this kind of deep, ineffable psychological scarring. And as we learned in the 8th house tape, And the eighth, it's just you can't put a handle on eighth house psychological grunge. It's just kind of comes up, and you can't put a handle on it. You don't even know what it is, but it just feels so uncomfortable that you drown yourself in alcohol and sexual behavior. And because there's a psychological disturbance, and you don't know what to do with it. I just, every time I go through my eighth house transits, I get a real taste for it, and there's this kind of uncanny background noise that you don't quite know what to do with. Problems with venereal disease is very common for Venus in the sixth and Scorpio. Secrecy obviously is the core word always for Scorpio, but here's the case. Prince had K2 conjunct Venus in Scorpio. Let's look at his chart. No, he's got it in Aries, but he has Scorpio rising. He's got a 6-8 relationship between Venus and Saturn. Remember, we said anytime we have a 6-8 relationship between Venus and Saturn, that's a cause of addiction, and obviously he died of a drug overdose. But again, in your case, it's Venus conjunct K2. So somebody that famous, look, he's got Saturn in the first, Atmakaraka and the Gandanta. Very difficult placement because, that's this psychological grunge area in itself. Venus conjunct K2, again, my wife has that. It's like deep emotional scarring. You're not enough. You're not good enough. So even though you can have all this fame, he's incredibly famous, very, significant income, Jupiter in the 11th here. It's a very troubled chart, and he did die young, and he did die of an overdose. And all these rock stars always are kind of dealing with alcohol and drugs and all these problems all the time. But and here's an example of Venus conjunct K2 in the sixth, and then a 6-8 relationship between Venus and K2 and Venus. Okay. Okay. And this is more about Venus and Scorpio in the sixth. Sometimes you can have fascination with the criminal world with Venus and Scorpio, and particularly this with Rahu. Maybe you've got a Rahu aspect. Sometimes, if Venus has some dignity, when you can see yourself as a healer with Venus in the sixth, you often get nurses when you get Venus in the sixth, if Venus has some dignity here. But very kind of problematic behavior anytime Venus and Scorpio in the sixth. Venus and Sagittarius in the sixth for Cancer rising. Again, Sagittarius is always about ethics and religion and dogma and things like that. So you're addicted to preaching and teaching. I do have an example of this, but I didn't pull it in. Actually, Abraham Lincoln's wife had Venus in Sagittarius in the sixth. And she actually fought with her husband for slavery, and she was actually very kind of intense about what she did. She had a very kind of shady background in the way her family made money, and she tried to kind of overcompensate it. But it was a case of Venus in the sixth. Pleasure derived from religious belief may result in marital disagreement, even divorce, mistreatment, illness, injury, inequality, that kind of thing. So you're addicted to belief systems in Sagittarius. You get fanatical people in Sagittarius. You don't, it's a problem. I mean, if you meet, if you ever get stopped by a Jehovah's Witness at the door, or you end up sitting next to a fundamentalist Baptist priest on the plane, you're being tried to, you're being converted. It's pretty uncomfortable, and people are kind of blind to their ambition to kind of convert everybody. And this is kind of how Venus in the sixth and Sagittarius can manifest. In Capricorn, this Leo rising. Again, Capricorn is about imposing limitations on people, ordering, regulating structure. There can be a problem in like being too intense about ordering people and making sure they behave the rules. I've got a little bit of, I don't have Venus, I have Venus in Capricorn in exchanging houses with Saturn. And I have to admit there was a time in my life that I was like that. It's kind of just like a little bit too imposing law and order on people who didn't want it, and tattling on people, and they didn't understand why I would do that. Very mature part of my life. Bladder infections and maybe a problem here. And then this is still Venus in Capricorn. Again, anytime we get Venus and Saturn, remember we said Venus and Saturn is a problem with addictive behavior, and in this case, you may have hostility toward the opposite sex. Venus and Saturn, even though they're good friends, we talked about that. Capricorn rising. In this case, we're dealing with Leo rising and putting Venus in the 6th, and so there's just more problems with relationship here, and this leads to career scandals. So Venus in Aquarius for Virgo rising. Aquarius is always connected to networking, acting, socializing with friends, changing the world, and sometimes you can get addicted to those type of behaviors. I think I had a lot of friends. I lived in a town where people were always kind of doing the latest multi-level marketing gig, and they would come to me, and we weren't even good friends. Or if we were friends, they were always trying to sell me their latest multi-level thing. And I remember some of them were at Venus in Aquarius. I didn't really understand what was going on, but they were so addicted to kind of networking in this way, it got to be kind of weird. And it was kind of a blind ambition. They were just, they were going to lose all. They didn't care if they lost their friends as long as they signed up another person to Herbalife. And after a while, I used to run away from these people because, it was kind of like, I wasn't a person, I was just a mark, and that can be a problem with Venus and Aquarius in the 6th. And then finally, for Pisces rising, you put Venus in the 6th for Libra rising. It's exalted there. I've seen a lot of people with this chart. There can be great, they can rise in society quite well. They're often very good people. They have humanitarian desires, but there's a lot of secrecy and hidden pleasures underneath the behavior. There's dreaming, fantasy, private bedroom relations. Jennifer Aniston has Venus. I think she has Venus, and she has a huge thing with Venus in Pisces. Okay, here's Jennifer. She's Libra rising, and we said that was Venus exalted in the 6th. But look, it's afflicted by both Rahu and Saturn. Again, incredible fame, incredible beauty, but obviously her marital life has been a total mess. And probably we should spend a day studying her Navamsha chart and her relationship with Brad and others, because it's quite a fascinating chart. But again, she's got two of the afflictions. She's got Venus conjunct Saturn, Venus conjunct Rahu in the 6th house. Exalted energy is bringing a lot of fame for her life, and yet there's incredible misery there also. And I think she does have a lot of addictive problems. Okay. Venus and Pisces in the 6th indicates relations with women who are extraordinarily beautiful, but they become very envious, and that undermines their marital balance. And certainly, Jennifer was always afraid of Brad and his affairs, and that creates a problem. She was you know, again, somebody who became all this money and all this fame, but her personal life was um, burdened by the press kind of taking every single picture and putting her in the tabloids every week. I mean, I'm not sure you want that kind of a life. Okay. People with Venus in the sixth still can move to the upper echelons of society, so that's the problem. The exalted Venus works here, and they can be very influential with charities. I have a friend's wife who has an exalted Venus in the sixth, but very influential in society and helping people, but still there can be a lot of problems underneath. Venus in the 12th. Let me take questions. I've talked a lot. Maybe I should see if anybody has Venus in the 6th in our. Oh, none of you have Venus in the 6th here. Any questions? This is one of my ranting lectures. I'm sorry about that, but I'm trying to kind of change my style a little bit. Let's see if anybody has any Venus afflictions in their charts. Any questions here? Anybody want to volunteer for Venus in the 6th? Hopefully nobody has it. I'll show you mine too, but okay, coffee. Okay, Coffee's got Venus in the 2nd with Mars. Again, if you read my article, Afi, do you have any, again, one of the things I didn't talk about, but I sent you the article on second house is the house of food and nourishment and family. And if there's any kind of sense of, we got Lord of the 6th in the 2nd. So I'm wondering if there is any, and then it's with the Lord of the 12th, I'm wondering if there's any addictive behavior toward food, or it could be money addiction, it could be, in Capricorn, it could be, ethical, doing what's right, power struggles and stuff like that. Afi, anything going on there? I don't want to put you on the spot here, but
Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, so couple of things. Yes, I do spend a lot of money on food. Going out and eating is a huge thing for me. I don't know if it's for anyone else, but it's extremely important to me. And it's hard for me to curb that and not go, spend money on food, going out and eating. As far as during my Venus period, which was from age of 7 to 27, during a certain period, I think age 17 to 22, I had very addictive behaviors. And of course, I attributed that to being young and, experimenting with things. So totally over that. But I can see, right now I'm in my Rahu period. Rahu's in the 6th, and the landlord is Venus. And like I said at the beginning, once I entered Rahu, I became extremely, almost addicted to watching and learning and listening to all the political stuff that was happening. I don't know if that.
Yeah, I mentioned that. I think I gave that an example. There can be kind of a, Capricorn has this sense of like, Sagittarius have kind of a strong tendency about being very socially active anyway, and going for human rights, and then Capricorn is, has this kind of tendency for being law-abiding and standing up for the truth. So I think there's a little bit of that going on there. That's kind of interesting. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's a reminder. I haven't brought this point out yet that anytime you get anybody in a Venus period, particularly if it's connected to certain rising signs that I pointed out earlier, you have to assume some unconscious addictive behavior going on. My Venus period was a very addictive period for me, and and I had a lot of sexual energy going on, and I didn't know what to do with it. It was very unconscious. I didn't, I was just emotionally frazzled, and I would, but Venus can definitely kind of, take over in that way, and you just don't even notice it. But it's just that's what it does.
Yeah.
Um,
For me, it was during the Venus-Jupiter, I think mostly Venus-Jupiter period that was happening. And like I said, I entered Venus period, Mahadasha, starting age 7. I don't really recall, but Venus, maybe Jupiter, a little bit of Venus-Saturn was quite addictive. So, yeah.
And yeah, we also have a 6-8 relationship between Venus and Jupiter in your chart. So anytime you get 6-8s in the dashas, you have to look for, 6-8 patterns. 6 is addiction, 8 is, these dealing with these kind of unconscious feelings that you can't get a hold of, and so you act out addictively. So that's why the 6-8s are very kind of powerful that way. Thank you for sharing, Effie. That was great. Appreciate your candor. Anybody else? Let's see. Audra's not here today. She's got Venus in the 11th. So not really relevant. It's Venus verse 6 from the moon.
Hey, Barry?
Yeah.
This is Victoria.
Hey, Victoria.
There is a chart. I'm not in front of my computer, so I can't remember what it's called. I want to call it the whole house chart, but maybe that's not quite it. But
right.
when that's calculated, my Venus, that's usually in my 7th house, backs up to my 6th. So I don't know how. I mean, there were some things that you were saying there that were, which I can't remember now. What you said, my memory's not great.
Right. Okay. So yeah, you've got Venus in the 6th in Aries. Look that slide again for you. Yeah, there is the Bob. I don't teach this very much anymore, but there's what's called the this chart down here, which is called the Shripati chart. There are different ways to kind of sometimes there are different house systems. I've kind of gone back to equal house, but sometimes there are tendencies that come up that you have to be aware of in the in the Shripati chart, which is when the moon. It's a different way of calculating the houses. So sometimes planets that are in early degrees move into the previous house.
To the house previous, yeah.
Yeah, and there is an interpretation for it. It does manifest a lot of those qualities. And I'm actually forgetting. There's some rule for it, but for the most part, you don't want to ignore it because there are influences, and if you ignore it, you sometimes miss important things in the chart.
Okay.
Okay, so that's what you're talking about, and then again, I haven't memorized all this stuff, but let's see. Actually, I didn't. The Venus in Aries, Venus in the 6th in Aries for Scorpio rising. There's a lot of carnal energy, suffering from sometimes venereal problems with debt, overspending. Venus is always a little bit overspending. The core energy is kind of learning the honesty of human relationship. And then somehow people don't always speak well of you because of this placement. So those are some of the things that you were maybe going on for you.
Well, the debt.
Yeah.
I mean, it probably. You may have been talking about a different placement of it. the carnal, but that was a long time ago. So much, not
Right.
so much now, but
Right.
um,
Were you in a
probably
Venus?
more during Jupiter. But I don't, because they would have been in the same house. I don't. There
Right.
was something I think you were saying about um, a way of doubting oneself. I think was, um, but that was a different placement. Sorry, I'm not being very coherent
Yeah,
here.
no, it's okay. It's tricky. The stuff is very subtle. Um, if
It'd be helpful if I could remember
yeah,
things.
it's okay. It's okay. If we put Venus into your sixth house here, you do have a 6-8 relationship with Saturn and Venus here. So um, it's a pretty complex sixth house. We didn't even talk about all the other things about the sixth house, but you obviously um, you have a very complex sixth house. And we really have to kind of come to understand it a little bit better. We'll spend a little more time on other aspects of the sixth house in a little bit.
Okay, well, I guess you're just basically saying it's not something that you should ignore. I've always kind of wondered about that, if it how much of an influence it really would have had. I
It
mean,
is
I won't run Venus until I'm old if I make it that far. But
right, right. Okay,
um,
so maybe you're lucky.
yeah, maybe.
Venus is a marker for Scorpio, so it'll kill you. So
Okay.
that's okay. Maybe not. Let's see. Okay, thanks, Victoria. Let's see who else we can look at here. Any other volunteers? You can just unmute your mic. Claudia can't share her. Claudia has an exalted Venus in the seventh in the 12th in the 11th house. It's not connected to the sixth house, so we don't have a problem there. Alan's not here today. Alan has Venus in the 8th, and from the moon it's in the 7th. Here's Herman Hesse's chart. Doesn't have Venus in the 6th, so I'm not sure why I included it. I've got him later in the lesson. He's got this very complex moon chart. Look at his moon chart. He's got Saturn, Rahu, and Mars conjunct the moon in the 11th, which is the 6th from the 6th. So you get, remember, anytime you have a very afflicted moon, you just have a very unstable emotional basis for dealing with your problems, and so there can be a tendency to turn to alcohol. So um, that's showing up that way. Very very afflicted moon chart, and he's one of my favorite authors, and his writing comes across in the well, it's not in the third, but aspected by Jupiter. He got the Nobel Prize in 1949. Very, very famous author. He also fought against the Nazis quite a bit, which was not the thing to do in Germany when he was growing up. He had to flee to Switzerland. Very interesting chart. Jamie, I don't know. Jamie has Venus in the 7th. Nothing really significant there. We'd also have to look at the Navamsha chart, see if there's anything on the 1-7 axis. Nothing with Venus. And Mohini, Gemini rising, Venus in the 3rd. Nothing on the 1-7 axis here. No Venus Saturn combination, so you don't have any of these problems. Naomi, Venus in the 8th. Got 5 planets in the 8th. We definitely have to talk about your chart when we get to the 8th house. I may take some questions on those tapes too if we have a moment later. Okay, nothing there. Dinar, he's in Turkey, he's sleeping, nothing with Venus. So good. Nobody in the class really has. I have a lot of go to Victoria's chart. Ushan, no, he's got a Venus Rahu in the 11th. So we don't have him on the phone here, but again, the 11th is 6 from the 6th. So we always have to think that that some of there could be some issues with Venus Rahu in the 12th. It may be around his spouse. I know when we talked to him, I know his spouse has been very ill, and so that's what's going on with Venus in the 11th. Okay. Naomi had a question. Let's see. Yeah, we'll get to you, Naomi. Okay, so I'm going to go on to some of the other material. Let's see. This is okay. So I've got one more chart to show you of William Faulkner. Interesting. So Venus in the 12th. We said another problem that you can have with Venus in the 12th, creating addictive problems. Obviously, sexual addiction. 12th house is the pleasures of the bed. So Venus in the 12th house has a blind spot to sexual addiction often. Maybe addicted to foreign countries. There can be other problems with infidelity if Venus is afflicted. William Faulkner is a case. He had Venus in the 12th. He has Venus conjunct the Moon in the 12th. Very promiscuous, a career alcoholic. His wife was an addicted drinker. He's addicted to gambling and sensual pleasures. Again, here's another example of Venus gone wild. You all know William Faulkner, great American author, who wrote The Sound of Fury, and believe it or not, I have a PhD in literature, and I've never read any William Faulkner. I don't know how that happened. Never liked him. I guess maybe I knew he had a kind of a busy life. Now, here we have Virgo rising, exalted Mercury. He's got a lot of planets in the first house. Giving him a lot of attention, but got Venus and the Moon in the 12th, and anytime you have Moon in the 12th, we saw from Melissa in the 12th house, there's just this kind of ineffable unconscious fear that you can't get a handle on, and so it kind of takes over, and you have to do something with it. And so in this case, he kind of turned to drink, and excessive. So basically, when you have with this, he's kind of acting out in the 12th house, the house of carnal pleasures, because he can't deal with his emotional grunge that's there, and so it gets acted out in sexual pleasure. But kind of very fascinating combination here. He's got Venus and Ketu's nakshatra. Actually, I do believe he had some level of fame in his life. I mean, amazing author, very innovative for the 20th century, but very troubled soul. And again, you get these, often you get people that they're geniuses, but there's some part of their life that is just out of balance. And Venus conjunct the moon, which we also have here in the 6th house, creates self-medicating, self-numbing tendencies that can be associated with addictions to food, alcohol, drugs. Pat Nixon, Richard Nixon's wife, was chain smoking her whole life. She has K2 in the 2nd. Betty Ford, Venus conjunct Moon and Saturn in the 9th. She was very addicted to painkillers and alcohol, and very famous for starting the Betty Ford Foundation. It took her years to get through her alcoholism. She's noted because she started these Betty Ford clinics to help people get through alcoholism, but she struggled with it, 30, 40 years before she got through it. Elizabeth Taylor again. We talked about Elizabeth Taylor. Venus in the 6th can also have a problem with workaholism, and that's another problem here. Here's a little bit more on Liz Taylor from Wikipedia. She's a stunning, philanthropist, supporting AIDS victims. But she, she had all the pluses and minuses of Venus conjunct Rahu in the 6th house. Actually, it is in the 6th house. She had the sensual cravings of Venus, Rahu Venus, the luxury for addiction and luxury. She's the epitome of luxury. She was this Cleopatra, in 1962, her iconic movie. Very, very famous actress in the 60s, if you remember her. Here's a case where because of the exalted Venus, her business flourished because of her iconic reputation of sensual excess, and everybody wanted to be her cosmetics because it was Liz Taylor, the epitome of beauty with that exalted Venus. Okay, let's stop here. You can read the other slides about the 6th house later. Do you have any questions on anything? I want to maybe go through, take questions on the videotapes that you may or may not have watched, and we will go. The blind spots of the 12th house and the 8th house and the 7th house are so important. We will, I sent you the slideshow on that already. We will go through those again carefully, but maybe it'll give you a little bit more time to watch those videotapes and think about them. And again, I want you to look for your own blind spots and to share them in the class if you feel comfortable, because it's really that self-discovery that's very helpful. Any questions?
Barry.
Yeah.
Yes. Barry, it's Audra. Will you look at my chart? It's a mess. My Venus is a mess. I have a 6-8 relationship. I've got Venus in Mrigashira at exalted. It's a mess.
Well, you're such a great lady. It can't be a mess.
Oh my gosh. It's amazing. Something that I've noticed about this, though, that is very fascinating is it's in Mrigashira. It moves from Purva, I can never say that, Padrapada. But the thing I notice is it's Venus in Taurus, owned by Venus in the 12th house, and it's Mrigashira is owned by Mars. Mars is my chart lord. And my vibration, the love frequency gets too high. And it seems like, I think to myself, wouldn't you think energy would attract like unto itself? You'd think you'd get something good. Well, it's interesting because that frequency is too high on the light side. So it will attract something just as dark as I am light. It's almost like Venus will attract its dark side.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, the problem with your relationship chart is Mars, Mars and Gemini in the 1st and Gemini in the 12th. So I think there's some subconscious self-loathing or something that may be attracting men that kind of force you into kind of, I don't know. I mean, you've got, for those of you who are kind of puzzled, we're talking about her Navamsha chart, and we don't want to just I did give you that rule about, you can look at the Navamsha chart for later in life as something that we grow into. And it is true, but you always have to take it in the context of the Rashi chart. So you don't beat yourself too much up. Venus goes from Aquarius into Taurus in your chart, which is a 4. And you want a 4 transposition because 4s, you want Venus in the 4th anyway because it creates comfort in the heart. So, I mean, don't be so hard on your, it is in the 12th. The 12th house is a blind spot for addictive love or addictive sensual pleasure. And the Lord of the chart, Gemini, you know, um, you know, I would think when you get into sexual relationships that things just unravel and maybe even get a little violent even, with the Mars Sun and aspect between the first and the seventh there. I don't know. I mean, in terms of the remedy for it, and remedies for the 12th house Venus are always kind of Venus requires discipline. It requires Saturn. And Saturn is discipline, and discipline is hard. I mean, you have to kind of just say no because you know what happens, And yet there's a strong desire for love, and yet it's unconscious. You can't let go of it. Is any of that making sense?
Yeah, and I personally think it's fascinating. Now, in the natal chart, there's a 6-8 relationship with K2, between K2 and Venus. And in the Navamsha chart, the Mercury in the 12th house is debilitated. So you've got Venus and Mercury conjunct, and the Mercury is debilitated, and the Venus is
Where's
at 26 degrees, 20 minutes, and the exalted is 27 degrees. So I think the whole thing is fascinating, and I tend to attract men who have some sexual perversion addiction like porn or something. I
right?
think that's interesting that it pulls in the ugly end of Venus. I don't
And
know that
that's
there's really
Yeah, that's Gemini. That's the Gemini influence here. Because remember, I said Gemini. If you remember when I was talking about Gemini, Gemini has a problem with Venus because it owns the 5th and the 12th. So, Gemini is always kind of looking for, um, um, is always looking for love, and when they can't get enough of it, they go to porn.
Yes,
Interesting.
I think the whole thing is interesting. It's very, yeah, like I said, I don't know if there's a solution, but it is interesting how the whole thing plays out.
Yeah,
And the
and then
interesting thing too, when you talk about addictions, I think I actually get addicted to the partner or the relationship. I don't know if you call it addicted to the addict or addicted just to the relationship, because it's like you were saying with Venus and Virgo, I don't see the dark side of them. I always see their potential, and I'm kind of blinded to the dark side of them. And you were talking about the energy going up and the energy going down. When the energy starts going down, I have a hard time letting go. But when the energy's going up, it almost feels like Kundalini, because you've
right,
got exalted Venus in its own house. I mean, in Taurus. It's,
right,
yeah, the going down part stinks.
yeah. Well, I mean,
Yeah, there's where
you're very
the
high
comes in.
soul. You need to attract a spiritual partner who will go up with you. I mean,
Exactly.
you just have to kind of say no. Basically, make a list of what you want in your partners now. Put it in front of a picture of Lakshmi and say, okay, I'm done with this old pattern. I need a high spiritual partner. Please
Yeah.
fit someone into my life.
I just think it's interesting to look at the paper trail.
Yeah, it is interesting, and then now we have to move forward with it. Okay, thank you for sharing, Audrey. That's great.
Thank you.
Anybody else with questions about 7th, 8th, 12th houses from the videotapes?
Harry, this is Afi.
Hi, Effie.
Hi. It's interesting. Every time Audra talks about her Navamsha chart, I remember my Navamsha. So Venus has moved in my Navamsha from Capricorn to Cancer. So it is seven, I guess, a 1-7 relationship. Nevertheless, it's in the 8th house.
Right.
And
It's tricky. Venus actually can do okay in the 8th house, but it can. You have to really kind of think about how it's manifesting in your chart. You have to start by looking at the 7th house lord, which is Mercury in the 12th. So, I mean, your relationship energy is troubled because the lord of the 7th and the 12th, and it's in the Gandanta and it's conjunct Ketu. So, I mean, your core level relationship energy is tricky. We'd also want to look at Mercury first in the Navamsha chart, which is got 2 malefics, and it's in the sign of debilitation. So it's very troubled, and it's with the moon. So it's kind of like you easily want to give up on relationships because they're emotionally troubling for your heart and kind of a mess.
yeah, well, I've certainly have given up on a lot of things when it comes to relationship, because like Audra was talking about, the type of men she attracts, I feel this. But then I was thinking when she was saying, men with, perversions and things like that, I thought all men had that, but, I could be totally wrong. So yes, you are correct in almost giving up in most relationships.
Yeah, I mean, everything can be remedied. I mean, I think you do have a Virgotama ascendant here, and Jupiter is in the 11th in the Navamsha chart. So I think your Jupiter period could bring a late romance. I mean, your Rahu period, which still goes on a long time, is going to bring troubled romances. But Jupiter in the 11th in the Navamsha chart, Virgotama. I mean, it's Virgotama in the sense of Sag. The Navamsha chart is Virgotama. So you have power in a relationship, but somehow you're right. It's the Mercury, and it's the 7th house lord that's the problem in the Navamsha chart, because it's conjunct Moon Mercury creates confusion. Mercury creates, debilitated Mercury creates, dreamy and impractical, men, and then the Rahu Saturn energy is just creates a lot of anxiety around in the heart when the breakups happen.
Mm-hmm.
Or even anticipating that the breakup will happen. So it's like, why bother, because I'm going to get hurt. I think you can get through it. I mean, your Jupiter period is a ways away, but you could have a late romance and get married late. It does happen. I'm hopeful.
Okay.
It's also got Jupiter, look, you've got Jupiter in the 7th DK in the natal chart too. I would be surprised if you didn't have a late marriage. And you have to think that Rahu Jupiter could bring it up also. You're just about to go into Rahu Jupiter, right?
Correct. I was actually told by someone that I should not get married. It's okay to have romance, but don't get married because, it could bring, because of how my Rashi and both Navamsha chart is situated, it could bring men who could cause a lot of, financial distress almost. So I'm hyper vigilant, if you will, when it comes to that.
Anything can get fixed, but you really have to have the awareness, and you have to do something. Rahu Jupiter would not be a good period. I mean, you're gonna have a romance in Rahu Jupiter, but you can see that it's an 8 relationship, so it's not going to end well. You definitely wouldn't want to get married in Rahu Jupiter, but if you get a marriage proposal in Jupiter itself, maybe there'll be late love for you. You're a great woman. Somebody should grab you. So, anyway, so don't beat yourself up. Okay, and other questions about any of the tapes that we had in relationship to your chart?
I have one more question, Barry.
Okay,
It's
Virginia.
Victoria again.
Victoria, great. Yeah. I had a
Um,
Virginia last semester, so I'm a little, and somehow I was.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
Well, I had a Virginia, I think last class, so I somehow I said Virginia. But,
People call me Virginia all the time, so
okay,
there you have it. You still
okay,
kind of do, I guess.
Virginia. Okay, I got the chart up.
Okay, so in the revised PowerPoint that you sent out this morning for our lesson today on 7, 8, and 12, somewhere in there, I read something about it's probably maybe more important, I think you said, the ruler of the house as opposed to the position of the planet.
Well, yes. I mean, actually, one of the things, I've heard Sanjay Rath say that actually sometimes um, plan, uh, uh, planets in the house are more powerful than the owners of the house. So I'm not sure of your question, but
Okay,
basically,
well, here
a
I can
planet.
make it more clear. I can make it more clear.
Okay, go
So
ahead.
we've been talking about Venus, and so Venus actually rules my 12th house.
Right.
Right, and so, and you also said you need to look at its associations because it goes to my 7th and it's with the sun and the moon. So
Right.
is it, first of all, so even if Venus is not in the 12th house, it's important to look at the fact that it's the ruler of the 12th house and its influence there.
Right. It will have a secondary influence. To me, the blind spot for the 12th house would be Mars, and that would be, and it's the ascendant lord. Now, the ascendant lord is always going to do well in its house in general. So you don't have a total blind spot with Mars in the 12th unless you really have a problem with repressed anger. Still, maybe you've gotten through it. Um,
Sorry, I just had a big plane go over the house. Just a second.
yeah,
Okay.
I heard it.
Well, I don't like to express my anger. It's not very nice, actually. But
I
when
think you
I'm
need,
pushed into a corner, I'll let somebody have it, and it's not pleasant. It's
right.
quite
Okay.
frightening. It actually frightens me too. So
Yeah, but you have to find a way to get your anger out. So the blind spot with Mars in the 12th, and it is the GK, in Gemini that means connected to 6, 8, and 12, and it's the ascendant lord. Means if you don't let it out, then it kind of manifests 6, 8, and 12 problems. So you have to find a way to. I mean, there are ways to. I always tell people who have Mars in the 12th, they may not be good at, they may not want to be exercising. They'd rather meditate, but that you actually have to find some exercise program. In this case, in Libra, which is the dispositor, which might be dance, Mars and Venus, to kind of let that energy out. Or sometimes you just have to scream at the top of your lungs in your car or something, or in your house when you're alone, because if it stays bottled up, then it's going to create a problem. And you
okay,
don't, yeah, particularly in a Mars period, or if you're going through Mars and Libra transits, you're going to have, anytime you're running a Mars period on a second or third level, or you're going through, a Mars transit to the 12th, you're gonna have, it's going to come up, it's going to get reinforced to come out and deal with it. But I think it is a blind spot. Um, I write about this all the time. Mars, little kids, they get angry for 5 minutes, they get into a fight, and then they're hugging their buddy again. But we've been taught that anger is bad, and it's a natural emotion. And we can't ignore it. But we have to find a way to release it. And you're right. For the most part, nobody wants anger released on them. So um, what I've done with repressed anger is sometimes I've had to write a letter to somebody telling them what I thought and then not mailing it, or I've had to, just scream in the house alone, or I've had to, usually when I mail it, it gets into more trouble and it escalates. The thing is, it just wants to get expressed. It doesn't have to harm anybody, you know. So just let it get expressed.
so just letting it out, not even necessarily looking for a particular outcome around it, just letting
Right.
it express and seeing what falls from that.
Right, right. And I think dance would be a really good one for you. Do you like dance?
Do I like what?
Dance.
Oh, I used to. I stopped dancing when I got married because my husband doesn't dance. Isn't that terrible?
Well, I think you
Pretty
need to go to a
bad.
dance class. I think you need to, I think dance would be a natural way to release that Mars energy.
Okay.
And Mars
Yeah.
retrograde, is funny. It has three levels. It either can be, it does too much all at once, and then it gets exhausted, and then it does nothing. And so it has
That's
to.
right. I can really relate to.
But then you have to find balance with it. And now it's retrograde in transit, so you just have to kind of like stay really balanced about it.
Okay.
Yeah,
Stay
great,
balanced about it.
great,
That's
great, great. It's hard.
that's a lifelong project right there. Okay.
It is. Well, that's Mars in the 12th. I mean, 12th house stuff. you know, if you go back to the 12th house lesson, if we get through it, we get enlightened. You've got your ascendant in the 12th house. If you can get through your Mars issues, and we could go deeper with it. I mean, it's in Swati Nakshatra, so it may be anger about material prosperity not being there, because Swati is a very prosperous kind of nakshatra, and if that energy is not being expressed, there's a lot of repressed energy about not having, but because it's in Swati. And then in the Navamsha chart, it's in the 12th also.
Hmm.
So later in life, you're still repressing your Mars. In this case, it's in Sag. Um, yeah, I think it's a lot of repressed anger as a 12th house blind spot, and sometimes it's also repressed power, because Mars is also the power chakra, the third
Hmm.
chakra. And so if you're not expressing who you are in life and exerting your power in what you do, then you get angry and frustrated that you're not being who you are, and that's a lifelong lesson then for you. If we were to look at the Karakamsha Namancha chart, we'd have to see
Hmm.
Mars in the first here, and Venus is in the eighth here.
Mars in the first. Did you say Mars in the first?
Yeah, and this is in the life. If you take my Gemini class, this is a chart which is taking the soul's purpose and connecting it with the material world.
Okay.
And so it's Libra rising. I mean, you can probably figure out how to create it on your chart, but the Lord of the chart is Venus, with
Hmm.
the Sun and the Moon in Taurus in the eighth, and Mars is in the first here. So,
Oh.
sometimes it takes me a while to kind of translate that into English. You could think about it. I don't know if you have anything that jumps off your head. In eighth house is spiritual, transcendental energy, and mystical energy, and it's astrology, and we actually we don't like to have Moon in the eighth usually, because again it's repressed emotion that needs to express itself. Um, to me, I'm just trying to think of Venus in the eighth. Um,
Well, I've been down a lot of different paths, and with groups, what winds up happening is as always, and I can't think of an exception, transgression of boundaries. And so basically, what I've done is I hate to even use the word, but isolated myself and I do a lot of my own self-study, and I stay away from groups. And I really like the kind of classes that like you're doing, because you don't really have, and I don't mean to be like disrespectful of people, but there's just something about my life, my chart, where there's a transgression of boundaries. And so I have not found a way to deal with that other than just like separate myself, because I get kind of tired of it. Something about my karma brings that out in people around me. And that makes me really angry. And I want to get mad at people because they won't be more responsible about how they interact with other people. That's what happens.
Oh, that's
I
beautiful.
get angry even thinking about it, just talking about it. But one thing I have done, it, and it helps, and it's just a way of working with my mind, and it has nothing to do with dance but I mean, I do love dance and I like yoga, but that, and I don't know if that's there for me or not. I mean, but it seems to help calm me down, but it could borderline spiritual bypassing at the same time. But, I just don't feel like putting myself in the fire anymore. I'm tired, I'm burned, and I'm tired of it. How's that? Sorry, talk about ranting.
Yeah, you've got Saturn in the 11th retrograde. So, 11th house is groups and group activity. And even though quote unquote Saturn does well in the 11th, I hate those rules like that. I mean, Saturn just doesn't really do well in the 11th. It aspects the first. It does, it does create restrictions, and the retrograde action just makes it like more powerful. And it's in the moon's nakshatra, so it creates a lot of emotional imbalance. And the moon's the lord of the ninth. So you can see the connection now between the moon and the ninth house, spiritual groups in the 11th house. And I mean, the remedy, the trick is then finding the remedy, which would be Mercury, which
sorry, go ahead.
Which you seek out in intellectual knowledge and such like that. And Mercury is kind of a remedy for you, I think. Astrology is helping you, Mercury owning the 8th house. But there may be a deeper remedy. Ultimately, we have to. I mean, I have been where you've been, Victoria. I was very active in spiritual groups for like 30 years, and then I kind of imploded, and I didn't like the way people acted, and these people were pretending to be spiritual, but they weren't.
That's right.
And I think what part of your lesson maybe is finding a kind way to express that, because the repressed anger is blocking your moksha on some level. And so
I would agree.
So you have to kind of find a way to speak the truth, and then Jupiter, Jupiter Lord the second and the fifth, you can do it. But Ketu's in the second, so again, there's some kind of restrictive fear about speaking the truth because Ketu always kind of just holds back, So to me, that Ketu in the second is the problem, and if you can get Jupiter speaking, sorry, Lord of the second, Lord of the second and the sixth rather. If you can get Jupiter speaking the truth, and Jupiter wants to speak the truth, then Mars won't feel repressed and we'll get through it. I mean, you may have to just plunge into another group, and when it comes, it's like the things that are hard to do, we have to do, and once we do it, and then we change the pattern, and instead of being repressed about it, we say, you find a kind way to say, that really offends me when you say those things. I mean, you're acting, this happened in my wife's spiritual group where somebody overcharged her for something that she needed to get and to make $500, and my wife blasted back and said, this is spiritual. Would our spiritual teacher do this? And she just put it right in their face. And I don't know if the person is going to change or get it, but at least she didn't repress it. My wife doesn't repress, and you're probably repressing. So let that Mars out. It wants to get out of prison.
Okay.
So anyway,
but no, it makes a lot of sense. I think that's quite wise. I just, I don't know. I just finally decided that I was, I don't know. I just was a loner. I shouldn't be around people.
No, the thing about you are a loner, 12th house, the Ascendant Lord in the 12th house. But I mean, it's hard. I mean, it's a very, when you get these you have the ascendant in the 12th house, I mean, you're really kind of working on moksha, and
Right.
and if you don't, you know, and it's the hardest thing in the world to do, and it's real easy to kind of retreat because it's too hard to deal with, you know, and so instead, you know, instead you withdraw, which is going into the cave, which is the 12th house, but in the end, if you don't get Mars out of the 12th house, you know, and it you know, it's gonna, you know, it's gonna die angry, you know.
Oh,
You
that's
know,
no. Okay. All
yeah, I
right.
mean, anger, basically, dead anger is resentment, which is not a good thing to have, you know, as you know. So,
Okay. All
okay.
right.
So for
Thanks.
the rest of you, hopefully we're following what I was saying, but it was trying to illustrate some of the things that we were learning in the 12th house, which is planets in the 12th house are kind of in jail or in prison and also can produce moksha, but we have to unlock their energy, otherwise um, they kind of die a slow death. So thank you for sharing with us, Victoria. That was allowed me to express something deeply.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Okay, final question. So next week, I mean, I can take a few more questions, but next week we're going to, we're going to go a little bit backwards. I'm hoping that, you know, I've been putting this new 10 or 12 hour lesson together on blind spots by rising sign and, um, you know, connections to other planets. And a lot of it is original thought that I need to do because I don't really have any sources for it. I got about a third of it done, and I'm hoping if I get it done this week, I will present it next week. If I don't get it done next week, we will do houses part 2, which we have to do anyway. We will continue with more blind spot in houses. I mean, a lot of this course originated because of this idea of the 7th and 12th house being blind spots, and so I definitely want to spend another 2 hours on it. And because I had the videotapes done on it already, it was giving you a chance to study it on your own. So for homework, look at your blind spots based on the principles in the slideshow that I sent you this morning, and in the tapes that I sent you before, and see if you can discover your blind spots, because ultimately you want to do that. And they're hard. I mean, I mean, at 62, I'm studying astrology, and I'm just saying, oh my God, this is my, I've been doing this my whole life. That's what I want you to have. You have to kind of have those realizations, and that's why we're doing this course. And does Naomi have another question? Okay, Naomi had a
Very.
question. Yeah.
Before you go,
Yeah.
when you have a minute, you're dealing with Naomi's question now, but when you have a minute, would you pull my chart up? And in addition to that, Victoria, I put a message to you on the chat box if you would look at it. Thank you, Barry.
Okay, great. So Naomi, yeah, Rahu Ketu. So Victoria's asking about Rahu Ketu in the 2nd, 8th axis. Did you? I don't know if Naomi can get online. Let's see, because I'd like to talk to people. Here's Naomi's chart. Gemini. I don't. It's not. Okay, that's. Hold on.
Hi, Barry.
Oh, hi Naomi. Good to hear you. So I got your question. Okay, let's get your chart up properly.
Yeah.
You've got a
Yeah.
lot
So
of
my question was, I heard that of all the axes, the number 2-8 axis is the worst, but they didn't explain why. Sometimes they just say these things unbacked, and I was wondering if it's just because the precarious nature of the 8th house. It's like a double negative, if it were.
Well, okay, so I also have Rahu Ketu in the 2nd, 8th house axis in between Sagittarius and Gemini, so you lucked out. I've thought about this one a lot. Now, it also depends on what nakshatras they're in and other things. First of all, I don't think it's really good to ever go with these people who are books that say this is the worst possible placement, because then you start making yourself the worst possible person. and it's not really like that. Rahu in the second has a problem, tends to be a kind of a black sheep in the family.
Yes.
And because there's no family nourishment, it may turn toward addictive substances. It could be money addiction, it could be food addiction, it could be substance addiction. So that, and Rahu does not have any dignity in Sagittarius. You've got it in Venus's nakshatra, which probably helps it a little bit. Your Rahu Ketu axis is very complicated because you've got you've got 4 planets influencing it. That's the first time I've really kind of looked at it in detail.
But would a stellium also complicate it further, if that makes any sense?
Well, here's what the stellium does. First of all, whenever you get a stellium, you have to read the chart from the stellium. So you're reading the chart as Gemini rising. And also because Ketu is the chart ruler, because it's more dominant than Mars. In terms, he's got more planets connected to it. So Ketu is the chart ruler. So there's a lot of reasons to read this chart as Ketu, as Gemini rising with Ketu, Sun, Saturn, and Venus, and Mercury in the first. So if you start reading the chart that way, then you get kind of new insights into it.
Okay.
The other thing about a stellium is that the planets from the stellium tend to bleed into 11 houses, into the 11th house from it. So there's a strong influence for Aries in the chart. So, and again, when I get these complicated stellium charts, I often have to think about them for 3 or 4 hours because there's a lot going on. But I would say that I have Ketu in the 8th. You've got Ketu in Ardra Nakshatra, which is the same thing that I do. Ketu and Ardra kind of can create a lot of unexpected calamities. I don't want to use the word calamities, but just a lot of distress. Actually, luckily, you only have 1 planet in Ardra and all that stellium. Ketu is in Rahu's nakshatra, so it brings in a lot of the Rahu influence. So, in a sense, actually, the obsession about astrology with Ketu in the 8th is connected to Ketu and Rahu's nakshatra in the 8th house. So, the question is obsession to astrology a good or a bad thing? I mean, I have it also. It is, in Gemini, it can be if we don't find a way to balance it out. If we stay too much in our head about it, then we eventually have to kind of, Scorpios by nature, have to kind of, are emotional, water-based sign, and they do have to kind of feel more than to think. So, so a lot of, so much Gemini energy. I have a lot of Gemini in my chart also, Naomi.
Yeah.
And I finally decided to embrace it.
Okay.
I used to think Mercury was the enemy, and it is kind of the enemy. But when I look at my other charts, I mean, my sole purpose chart is Gemini, which is teaching and writing, and so I finally decided. Your sole purpose chart, I'd have to look at really quickly, but your soul chart is also Gemini. So, for you, the Gemini's okay, and you've got Mercury in Gemini. So, I mean, I wouldn't negate the Gemini energy, which you're not. Again, going back to your original question, I don't like saying, something is the worst of the bad. I mean, to me, Rahu in the 8th is a really difficult placement. Ketu in the 8th is not as difficult. Rahu in the 8th is difficult because The eighth house is really kind of deep subconscious grunge that you can't get a handle with it. And Rahu is deep unconscious grunge. If you put those two together, then Rahu in the eighth is really a mess. Ketu in the eighth is kind of, the eighth house, don't forget, is connected to kind of the transcendental mystical realm of life. And Ketu is mystical by nature. So Ketu, I don't know if you're into meditation practice, but with all these planets in the eighth house, the only solution to dealing with eighth house stuff is to get involved in meditation, because then everything gets taken care of.
Okay.
And we can talk more about that, but that's kind of fascinating.
Okay, thank you, Barry.
Yeah, that was a great question. Okay, so final Jeopardy here. Anybody have any last comments? Audra wanted me to say something. I don't know how much more I can say, Audra, but I'll let you. I may have to go soon because I start talking too much. Audra, so
All I wanted to know, Barry, on my chart, can you tell me what my yogi point is?
Oh, you read my article.
I did, and now I have to know what the yogi point is, or your article is useless to me.
Yeah, it's your fourth house. It's Cancer. You have Rahu about to go. You have Rahu going over your yogi point this year. So that could bring sudden gains around real estate or vehicles, or other fourth house issues. Ideally, the yogi point gets triggered with benefics. So the trine from Scorpio to your yogi point, which will happen in November, December, will definitely activate something good in that respect. And we just had Venus go over your yogi point. It's kind of a short-term transit. It wouldn't do much. And we don't have Saturn aspect in the yogi point. So in terms of the yogi point, it's usually the transits that activate it. And actually, I've never done any research on Rahu. I'll have to do some research on Rahu activating the yogi point. Usually you look for Jupiter and Venus to activate it. But it should suggest, have you had luck with homes and vehicles, even though, I know things are a little dire at the moment, but have you had luck with homes and vehicles in general?
I've inherited quite a bit of property over the years, but I've had the same vehicle for like literally 21, 22 years. I could use another one.
Okay. Vehicles are,
Most people don't.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, most people don't typically keep a vehicle for 20 some years.
Yeah, I hear you. We also have to look at Venus for vehicles, which is conjunct the Lord of the Sixth. Okay, well, it's good that that's good that you inherit a lot of property, although it doesn't help with cash flow sometimes.
What is the degrees of the yogi point, Barry?
7-11.
7-11, is that what you said?
7 degrees 11. It's in Pusha.
Okay, Pusha.
It's in Pusha, so it's connected to Saturn in the 12th. So I'd have to think about, maybe you need to donate your property to create an ashram. I don't know. Or the 4th and the 12th, it's connection between property and Saturn and Jupiter. I don't know. This just came to me. Who knows if it's right?
Boy, I'd have to know who to donate it to.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if you want to donate it to it, but that just came up. It might come, and that might not happen until Saturn moon period or something like that. But
and didn't you say for us to look at, if it's in Cancer, it's ruled by the moon? Aren't we supposed to look at the ruler of the sign?
Right.
Am I wrong?
Right. Yeah. The moon. You've got Moon Mars in Aries. that's actually a strong placement. Moon and Mars aren't real happy together on some level, but the moon feels afflicted, but that combination isn't great. But there's a yoga for it, a Mangala Chandra yoga, which is usually pretty good. It usually, I have it in my chart also. It's usually, I mean, it would only manifest in a Mars Moon or a Moon Mars period, but it would be good.
Okay.
It would be good for money. You know, or in this case, property, and maybe it has manifested already.
But that's when you're in a moon or Mars period. Did I follow what you said?
Yeah, the rule with yogas is tricky. I don't even teach them because I think they're frustrating. Because people, you get these great yogas in your chart, but they may only come like 1 year in your life, and it may be, you know, years and years away from where you're at. And so, like, people get all, oh, I've got this Mahapurusha yoga, and you know, it's so great. There's some yogas that manifest your whole life, and then there's some yogas that only manifest during the dasha bhuktis of the connections. So a Mangala Chandra yoga would manifest between Mars Moon and Moon Mars, a Moon Mars or a Mars Moon period, which you're in Venus. So you know, your moon period will come off. You'll experience it in your moon period. But you know,
I'm in Rahu right now. I'm in a Rahu dasha, Rahu Venus.
Oh, you're in Rahu Venus. Okay, so then you're not gonna.
And you're saying Rahu would go over that yogi point. So is that negative or positive?
I'm just trying to remember it because when I've taught the yogi point, I've always taught it in connection to benefics influencing it. I'm going to ask my colleague who did a master's thesis on it. Rahu, you know, Rahu can bring a lot of material gains, as you know. So, you know, I'm kind of open to that happening.
Good.
And you'll have to send me a note to see if Janet talked to you, but we can't. I'm still recording, so I can't talk about that now. But
okay, and two, isn't it six? Is it 6 houses or 6 nakshatras away from the yogi point is supposed to be negative? The other point.
It's six nakshatras, yeah.
6 next. Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
All righty. Well, thank you for.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah, no, that's good. It's a good question.
Thank you for telling me what the point was. I did it longhand. I calculated it longhand, but I needed some confirmation. I wasn't sure if I calculated it correctly.
That's really great that you did it longhand. That's how you really learn this stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, once you sent the article out, I had to know.
I had a bunch of people on Facebook ask me, and I can't ask. I mean, you're in my class, you know, it's easy, but I can't do other people's charts and look at their yogi points.
Yeah. Thank you, Barry.
Okay. So that's going to end our class today. Any final questions or thoughts? It's almost 5 o'clock. Time goes by when you're having fun. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I may do a sidebar with Jamie or Mohini if they have time, but I think we'll have to talk on Skype. Okay, take care. Bye.